Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. Donald Trump's lawyers were in court today for their first hearing before the newly appointed special master, who is tasked with reviewing the classified documents the FBI seized from Trump's retirement home in Florida. And in that courtroom, his lawyers were essentially tasked with defending the indefensible. The ex-president claimed that he had a right to keep the roughly 11,000 documents removed from Mar-a-Lago, and that he has some privilege that confers ownership on him with respect to the 300 documents found with classified markings. That position, that his lawyers argued today, does not make any sense. As someone pointed out, it all boils down to Donald Trump's belief that he is still, as of today, here in September of 2022, President of the United States. That he still has the powers of the executive branch, that those documents, the vast majority of which are clearly covered by the Presidential Records Act, should be government property, that those documents belong to him to do with whatever he wants. That's the core point from which this whole dispute flows. Of course, Donald Trump isn't the president because he lost the election in 2020 fair and square, no matter what he says, no matter how much he whines about it. He is no longer president, and he no longer has any of the powers that go along with that office. But Trump doesn't care about that. He kept the documents anyway, even though, and this is key, his own lawyers warned him not to do it over and over and over again. As New York Times reported earlier this summer, Trump's deputy White House counsel Pat Philbin tried to help the National Archives retrieve the material that Donald Trump took. But the former president repeatedly resisted entreaties from his advisor, saying, quote, "It's not theirs, it's mine." An email obtained by the Times last month shows that White House counsel Pat Cipollone also determined the record should have been turned over to the National Archives. And just yesterday, we learned that another Trump White House lawyer, Eric Hirschman, quote, sought to impress upon Trump the seriousness of the issue, the potential for investigations and legal exposure if he did not return the documents. That was last year. Wasn't one warning. It was multiple warnings from multiple lawyers about the same thing, saying the same thing. The last one being this gentleman you see there, Mr. Hirschman. You may remember him from his role in the first impeachment trial when he was trying to convince all of us that Donald Trump had done nothing wrong and could be trusted. He also delivered compelling testimony to the January 6th committee, including this story about the advice that he gave coup memo author John Eastman after January 6th.
Said, I only want to hear two words coming out of your mouth from now on. Orderly transition. And I screamed and said, I don't want to hear any other effing words coming out of your mouth, no matter what, other than orderly transition. Repeat those words to me. And I screamed that. Eventually he said, orderly transition. I said, good, John. Now I'm going to give you the best free legal advice you're ever getting in your life. Get a great effing criminal defense lawyer. You're going to need it. And then I hung up on him.
We don't know if Hirschman is quite so tough when he's actually in the midst of a conflicted situation, but you can imagine how the baseball bat of justice might have delivered the message to Donald Trump that he was violating the law and had to give the documents back. But it was surely a familiar scene for Donald Trump. Throughout the ex-president's life and career, his impulse is always to do sketchy, unlawful things, to cut corners, to get away with stuff, while the lawyers around him tell him he cannot do those things. And what is sort of remarkable, honestly, is that in most cases, Trump actually has kind of a fine-tuned antenna for just how close he can get to the line without crossing into outright, easily provable crimes. That has saved him many times before. But this time it appears that he stepped right over that line, the crystal clear line that his lawyers told him were there. And to understand why that finally happened, you have to look at who he's actually listening to. Because he was ignoring his highly qualified White House lawyers, Pat Philbin, Pat Cipollone, and Eric Hirschman. Instead, he was reportedly taking the advice of this guy.
We want to know about the deep state effort to overthrow the President of the United States. You know, in many ways, it's remarkable. The president is a crime victim. He was targeted illegally by the Obama administration.
If he doesn't want to fire Mueller directly, maybe just pardon everyone. Everyone caught up in it, either directly or indirectly, who's the subject, the target, you name it. Just pardon it all.
I think the raid was a fraud, an abuse, and a sham. There was no good faith basis to target Trump here with this outrageous raid. And all those records he has are his records. And they should stop pretending that just because they think they're presidential records and they think it's classified, that's the final answer, and it ain't.
So that's a guy named Tom Fitton. He's like a second, third tier conservative activist, head of the right-wing group Judicial Watch. They've been around for forever. Somewhat ludicrous figure, honestly. I'd put him in the Ginny Thomas category of the American right. Imagine a more senior James O'Keefe on steroids. As Politico puts it, Fitton has made a career of suing the federal government over suspected bureaucratic corruption, irritating every president since Bill Clinton. That's true. In fact, Fitton's organization has tormented the Clintons for nearly 20 years, uncovering documents on their scandals du jour, from Whitewater to Travelgate to the suicide of Vince Foster. So he's been at this a long time, basically a right-wing rabble-rouser, but he found an enthusiastic booster in Donald Trump. Surprise, surprise. Now, this is faded, as it were, considering Fitton has been boosting Trump for years. He actually takes credit for being one of the first public figures to criticize the Mueller investigation as corrupt and unconstitutional. Now, I should note here, Tom Fitton is not a lawyer. He's just a dude with some big money right-wing donors, I guess. But he's been giving Donald Trump a lot of legal advice that the ex-president's actually listening to. Since as early as February, Fitton has been reportedly calling Trump, telling him it was a mistake to give the records from Mar-a-Lago to the National Archives, that his team should have never let the archives, quote, strong-arm into returning them. Fitton said the records belonged to Trump, citing a 2012 court case involving his organization that he said gave the former president authority to do what he wanted with records from his own term in office. He suggested to Trump if the archives came back, he should not give up any additional records. Trump, quote, began obsessing over Fitton's arguments, complaining to aides about the 15 boxes that were handed over, and even asked Fitton at one point to brief his attorneys. I'm sure they loved that one. As one person close to the ex-president put it, quote, the moment Tom got in the boss's ear, it was downhill from there. It's like the Overstock guy or the pillow guy. So Tom Fitton, professional right-wing scandalmonger, appears to have facilitated the kind of black and white commission of an easily provable crime that Donald Trump on his own and so far managed to avoid. It's really an amazing feat. Of all people, Tom Fitton, who ended up putting Donald Trump in arguably the most acute legal peril he has ever been in. Well played. And that legal peril was on full display today at the Brooklyn courthouse, where Judge Raymond Dearie, the newly appointed special master, heard the arguments from the ex-president's lawyers, who repeated Trump's claim that he declassified the documents. Judge Dearie said the government gave him clear evidence these are classified documents, that as far as he's concerned, that's the end of it. Trump's lawyers responded by basically saying they do not yet want to make their case about why the documents are not classified. Judge Dearie told them he will go ahead and continue the business of the court. Quote, you can't have your cake and eat it.